I was trying to high five you. It's cool if I chew gum through this whole thing, right? Do you ever feel like you get, distracted by your phone? No matter what you're trying to do, you keep checking Instagram, even though you, just checked Instagram? I mean, how many times have you checked your various social media accounts today? Did you wake up and immediately get a big old face full of your phone? Maybe you did some scrolling while you ate breakfast? Well, if you did, you're not alone. If you're anything like me, you've been on social media today more than you'd like to admit. Even when you tell yourself, okay, that's it, I am done. It's only a matter of minutes before you click back and start checking your feeds again. But why is it like this? Social sites like Facebook and Instagram and Tinder actually use basic human psychology and our desire for positive reinforcement to control our attention. It's surprisingly similar to other types of addictions like gambling or even drugs. It's really interesting stuff. This is stuff and it's interesting. I'm Mateo, and on today's episode, we're exploring a question that we honestly don't know the answer to. Should social media be regulated? I mean, we regulate other addictive behaviors like gambling and cigarettes, so why not the internet? Social media is an area that seems ripe for potential regulation because social media sites in particular are psychologically designed to dominate our attention. First, let's break down how the internet, and social media especially, get us hooked. The internet has no chill. To understand today's social media landscape, we need to go back to the 1930s. That's when this kind of controversial American psychologist named B.F. Skinner created something he called the Operant conditioning chamber. It was essentially a cage in which Skinner could control certain rewards for certain behaviors. One of the experiments he did with these chambers was study the behavior of pigeons and rats. Skinner was interested in how environmental factors shape our actions. He believed that in order to understand behaviors, you simply need to look at the consequences of actions. So he placed pigeons and rats in cages and rewarded them for certain actions like pressing a pedal or tapping at plexiglass. These actions would trigger positive reinforcement, like getting a treat. He found that when consequences are positive, the actions that cause them are likely to be repeated. If the consequences are negative, they're not. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where Skinner's experiments that began in the 1930s start to infiltrate our daily lives today. Skinner found that if he made the rewards variable, like instead of getting a treat for every press of the lever, you get a treat for every 5th press, or 50th, or 500th press of the lever, the animals essentially went bananas. According to the AEON article, one pigeon hit the glass some 87,000 times in a 14-hour period, even though it received a reward less than 1% of the time. Another pecked 2.5 times per second for 16 hours straight. When the conditions for getting a reward were random and unstable, the animals became compulsive, which I can totally relate to. Mom texts me, cute. Anyway, when you apply these lessons to today's internet culture, especially social media, you see how people like myself and my colleagues and friends, and maybe even you, can all get hooked. Psychologists began looking into the addictive potential of the internet as far back as 1997. And trust me, back in 97, the net was nothing like it is today. Even then, in what was still the relatively early days of the web, certain people couldn't cut back, and their behavior mirrored other addictions. They struggled at work and became socially isolated. In 2008, the American Journal of Psychiatry published a piece strongly encouraging that internet addiction be added to the next version of the DSM, which people sometimes call the Bible of modern psychiatry. It wasn't added, and scientifically speaking, experts don't yet agree that internet addiction is technically a behavioral addiction. Because research takes time, it can be hard to keep up with how fast the web changes. Compulsive behaviors are everywhere. Some people bite their nails or pull out their hair, and some people check their email 100 times an hour. With the internet, it can be difficult to identify where compulsion ends and addiction begins. Chemical addictions like alcohol or heroin or cocaine or cigarettes, they affect us physically in ways that non-substance behaviors don't. I mean, even if you're gambling online, you're not adding an outside substance to your system. But it turns out non-chemical compulsion and more traditional addictions do have a lot in common. So while internet addiction is still being studied and debated, researchers have found that the internet can make people act like traditional substance abusers. Internet addiction can be difficult to treat, and those suffering can even go through withdrawal. So how did it get this way? The internet these days dominates our lives, and social media dominates the internet, meaning it's hard to separate social media addiction from internet addiction. That's because the internet is a medium. It's not an activity or a behavior. The internet is a place lots of people go for certain addictive activities like gambling or shopping or pornography, but the internet is not those activities alone. It's merely a sum of its infinite parts, which is why it can be hard to pin down how addictive the internet is in and of itself. I mean, if you spend all of your time shopping online, are you addicted to retail or the internet? It's not entirely clear, but one thing we do know is that social media sites are specifically designed to break down our willpower and get us acting compulsively. Here's how it works. Think of your feed on Facebook or Instagram or Tinder. What do? You scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll some more. This is due to triggers or whatever prompts you to scroll, like a desire to see what your friends are up to or who you might match with. When you scroll or swipe or post, you're meeting these triggers with actions. But here's where social media is brilliant at getting us hooked. When we scroll and swipe, we encounter variable rewards, which means we never really know what we're gonna get. Add to that the opportunity for us to make an investment, like adding a comment or reaction to a post, and we as users are prone to increase our time in the cycle of trigger, action, and reward. Suddenly, we're like the pigeons in Skinner's experiment. The uncertain reward of social media can create compulsive behavior. We peck and peck, or scroll and scroll, searching for our variable reward treats. Tech companies know this and model their products on Skinner's experiments. Social platforms monetize our attention. The longer we're on their sites, the more ad revenue they bring in. And that means that these companies have every incentive to break down our willpower and keep us scrolling for an hour when we really just meant to scroll for a few minutes. Social media and the internet are so addictive, in fact, that there are treatment centers around the world to help people unplug. And many of those who seek treatment are teenagers. In China, it's believed that upwards of 24 million young people are hooked on the internet. So what can we do about it? Especially considering no one can really pinpoint what healthy internet use looks like. I can't help but wonder, should the internet have some sort of warnings and regulation with it, especially for young people? The problem is, the internet is a difficult place to govern, and one of the things that makes the internet so great is that it isn't micromanaged by Western governments. It's this freeform wonderland of beauty and garbage and kitty cats. And super dank memes. One obvious way to help us regulate our own social media use would be to kill the infinite scroll feature. When pages automatically refresh, they're constantly resetting the triggers we talked about earlier, enticing us to scroll and scroll in search of our rewards and investments. The entire point of the infinite scroll is to sidestep our self-control. Infinite scroll, no self-control, and essentially keep us soaking up ads. It has no benefit for users. If social sites killed the infinite scroll, we would find moments of pause at the end of a page and decide for ourselves if we want to continue or not. Then we might have an easier time setting boundaries. Another thing internet sites could do is let us know when we're exhibiting compulsive behavior. Sites like Facebook and Twitter know exactly how much time we're spending on them and how many times we're clicking in. They could probably identify who's struggling with compulsive addiction-like behaviors and help them set boundaries, like a limit on how much time per day an individual wants to spend scrolling. Seriously, lock me out of Facebook if I log in more than 20 times a day. These are just a few ideas. And where does personal responsibility come in? Addiction is a serious illness, and it may be the time to look at internet addiction in a more deliberate way. But for now, by at least understanding how companies manipulate our basic animal tendencies, maybe we can all be a little less compulsive online. Let's talk in the comments. At Zoetic here, we're really trying to make something cool and interesting, and we want you guys to be a part of it. Check out the research materials that I posted. There's links below. Read about what I read about when I wrote this piece, because I really do want to hear your thoughts on this. I don't know what the answer is, and I want to hear if you do. Don't forget to subscribe, and then afterwards, maybe log off for a little while. We'll see you next week.